The former Apartheid Askari, Tlhomedi Mfalapitsa, is in court for the murders of the Cosas 3 of the 4, 40 years ago. Last year, families of the students approached the courts to force the National Prosecuting Authority to prosecute those responsible. eNCA's Masego Rahlaga sat down with the 67-year-old. He told her he had no choice and that the ANC had betrayed him. Masego joins me now for an update. And Masego, you had that conversation with Tlhomedi Mfalapitsa, and I know that to the extent that there have been people who've been confused about whether he was an alleged Askari or was indeed an Askari, that there's no debate about that he was an Askari for the apartheid security forces. Tell me where we are at this stage in terms of getting the trial underway in earnest.
Well, Caesar, that argument, understandably, people still thinking that Tlhomedi Mfalapitsa is still going on trial for the state to prove that he is in fact, an Apartheid Askari. But that was already proven in 1999 when he appeared before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, when he was also applying for amnesty for some of the killings that he was involved in back in those days. He is here in court, and as you know, he's out on warning, so he is standing over there waiting for the judge to call him. I'm not sure if you can see a picture of him, but he's there in a pink shirt, he's got a cap on. He is out on warning, Caesar, so the Hawks usually fetch him at his home in Rustenburg and bring him all the way here every time he has to appear. In terms of how far we are, Caesar, I imagine that the prosecutor is in trouble right now, as well as the National Prosecuting Authority. And why I say this to us is because yet again we're facing the possibility of another postponement in this case. The trial was supposed to start today, but as you know, there is a man, the detonator of those bombs that were planted at that house, at that mine dump in Krugersdorp back in February the 15th, 1982, an officer by the surname Rodrich. He was only arrested a couple of weeks ago by the Hawks, and he, of course, had to start, as the South African law stipulates, he had to start by appearing at the magistrate's court. He's expected to join Mfalapitsa at some point, but that's not going to happen today because his last appearance at the magistrate's court is expected to happen tomorrow, and that's when he'll be transferred to this court here. But currently, why I say the prosecution could be in trouble is because they're somewhere in this court right now speaking to the affected families. And when I spoke to them last week, actually, they said that they know of the possibility of a postponement because of the latest development, but they do not want to accept that. So I'm pretty sure it's quite heated in that room. So that's why the judge had to then stand down the case until around 11:30. So we haven't really moved this morning, but what I can tell you, Tulas, is that there's a huge possibility, actually 99% possibility, that there'll be another postponement with this case.
All right, so you laid out really nicely, Masego, the factors that are at play because of the complexity of a second person needing to join Mfalapitsa in the dock. And this person is still, his matter is still in the early stages in the regional court, magistrate's court, whereas if the intention is to try them together, ideally they should be joined together in there. But there are two separate stages of their matters.
That's correct, Caesar, but also over and above that, remember there's a third person. All in all, there was more than these three, but of course some of the people involved in this case passed away through these years. I mean, on the 15th of February next year, it'll be exactly 40 years since that happened. Basically since 1999, when Tlhomedi Mfalapitsa appeared before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, when the TRC actually, made recommendations to the states to have this case prosecuted. It's been 22 years, basically, since the truth came out that the family has been waiting. More than 22, actually, because the truth came out in 1996, but the TRC heard about the case in 1999. So that's how long it's been. So it's always been a step forward, only to wait. Step forward, only to wait. So another person who still has to be arrested with this case is a very well-known Askari, Joe Mamasela. He apparently is the person who drove the Cosas 4 to the place where they were going to be killed. killed back in 1982. He was the driver of the vehicle, picked them up at the Leratong hospital on that evening and drove them to their death. So we're still waiting to find out when the state will arrest him. But I did ask the ANC's head of organizing, Nomvula Mokonyane, when she was with me in studio yesterday, and she said that they are applying pressure on the law organs to make an arrest when it comes to Joe Mamasela. What we know is that that could happen soon, but we don't have any information as to when. So if he's arrested, for instance, after these current two who have been arrested go on trial, that means the family has to wait yet again for another leg of the trial to start. So it's really just a complicated case that also just tells the history, the deep history that South Africa has.
Yeah, absolutely. Masego, lastly, let me ask you a personal question. I can tell that you have sunk your teeth into this particular story. What is it about it that has intrigued you so much? I can see the levels to which you are really going to really fully understand what transpired in this case. What is it about it that grips your imagination?
Well, to tell you the truth, when I came to this case, when I was assigned to this case the first time, I was expecting to meet somebody who, when you imagine an Askari, you imagine somebody who's very different from his physique. He's a very small person, looking very old at this point. He's turning 70 soon, and he said that himself. But also it was about the families and how hurt they are that this case is taking so long. But to just go a little bit more personal, my dad actually knew Joe Mamasela, and from the stories that my dad used to tell me, he went to school with him. In fact, Joe Mamasela lived the street next from my dad's house in a community called Tlhomedi in Soweto, and they went to school together. So my dad used to tell me these stories about this man who would take students, tell them that they're going to join Cosas or other student movements to fight the struggle, and then suddenly those students would disappear and never come back. So really it just took me back to those stories that my father would tell me as I was growing up, and that's why I'm so attached to the story.
Oh, I'm so glad I asked you that question, Masego. Thank you for that and for opening up and just letting us into your own processes of thinking around this particular story. Of huge importance is that story that Masego is telling, because the question keeps getting asked when the TRC was very clear that there were a number of cases that needed follow through in terms of prosecution. Why has it not happened? Why has it not happened? And I did ask Shamila Patoi when I spoke to her about a month ago, and she gave a number of reasons where they are at this particular point. But as you can see, it's very complex. The one person is already at the High Court ready for trial. The other person is yet to be arrested. And the third person has been arrested and is still at the regional court processes of having the matter heard there before it's transferred to the High Court.